So this session is called an introduction to proposed orphan drug framework, and we are very lucky to have David K. Lee from Health Canada speak to us. David is the Director of the Office of Legislative and Regulatory Modernization at Health Canada. This office is mandated to modernize the Canadian Food and Drug Act and the corresponding regulatory frameworks. Mr. Lee received his law degree from Queen's University. He articled at the Federal Court of Canada and worked in private practice until 1999 when he joined Health Canada. So now I would like to invite David Lee from Health Canada to the podium for his address. Thanks.
Thank you so much for the invitation to be here. We're very excited about working on an orphan drug framework in Canada. So I'll do three things, actually. I want to say why I think that's important, and hopefully we can share views about that. And then I'll talk about what we think the framework should look like, what it should actually do. And then I'll talk about the process, because this is the kind of discussion. I know making federal laws is pretty remote to most people, well, some. But it's a really important exercise. What I do during the day at work is write laws that I go up and get presented to the House of Commons and or regulations that get made, and people have to follow these rules. And I've learned that one of the main things to do is go out and talk and listen to people that are going to be affected by them. It's so important to do that. So because I've made some bad laws in the past, I've really participated in not listening. This is decades ago, hopefully. But really listening to what's needed is key to making the proposals work. And this is a really important policy, because orphan drugs serves, I think, one of the least well-served communities in the country, and that's people with rare diseases. The whole system for drug approvals and drug research is really built on very common diseases. That's just historically how it's happened. And because there's a ton of scientific research out there. People out in labs, people in companies are always, working away, trying to find new treatments to put into the Canadian treatment context. And that's great. We need that basic science to keep operating and to keep moving along. But it's not a matter just of coming up with really great scientific idea for treatment and landing on that aha moment where you start to see a therapy might work. Everybody wants a therapy for their condition. There are something like 7,000 identified rare diseases and not very many therapies to treat them. So the need is huge out there. The need to do the science around that is huge. But it's not just doing the science. Once you actually get the idea that something's going to work as a drug, then you have to start a really long process. You have to get the scientific information together to show that the product's going to work when it's prescribed by physicians or bought over the counter, and that it's safe. If you think about it, most things that are powerful enough to give you a beneficial effect are probably going to affect your body in other ways as well. So you might get something that works really, really well for the condition you have, but it may also operate on your liver or some other organ, and it can start to harm you over time, and we have to know about that. And that's why Health Canada has laws and rules about, you can't just invent something medically and then give it to everybody in the country. Because we've had episodes in the past where that's happened and then many, many people are harmed. So the science you have to sit down and do from that early moment when you discovered something's got some promise, all the way to getting it out into the market, is a big discussion. And then once it's out in the market, there's another discussion going on, and that's often in the provincial realm. The provinces have to decide, who am I going to help reimburse? Which therapies am I going to help pay for? And in the rare disease area, that can be a very tough discussion because some of these therapies are really expensive. And so they really want to know they work and that they're beneficial for people so they can put the funding in behind it. And so that's a policy area because rare diseases, and I'll go into why, but rare diseases are both a hard area to study scientifically, but it's also harder to know because you've got small populations. It's harder to know whether the drug's really working well and to know enough about the safety. So we're all sitting there as regulators, so the federal government making sure it's safe, the provincial government's making sure that they're buying something that really works. We have less scientific data usually around these types of drugs than others. And that's why in other countries, the government's put in a rare disease policy. So the states got the idea down in the US about 30 years ago that the way these drugs have to be studied, and because they're given to small populations, makes it very hard for companies to start with an invention and move it out into the approved drug market. And so they made a policy, a special set of rules for these drugs, so that when people got a good idea, they could come into the agency and have a discussion, how do I study this scientifically? And the government would have a really good conversation with them. And they would give them protections around that research to make sure that if they did put all that investment in, then they would be able to market the drug and not have the generics come in too quickly. So they set up basically a good research environment so you could start with your invention and try to get all the way to the patients. And that's what matters at the end of the day. That's why the policy was set out, is to make sure that we get treatments for areas that otherwise would not even be researched, and certainly not have a therapy go out for them. Europe followed into that whole sort of setting about 15 years ago. So this is an area actually where it's really neat that both the US and the European authorities cooperate a lot about this. And one of the reasons is because for rare diseases, again, because it's not like headache medicine where everybody's taking it, because you may only have less than 50 people in the country with a particular genetic disease, because it's so small like that, it makes sense internationally to pool as many patients as you can together, because then you can learn more scientifically. You can actually see more about how the drug's working in that group. And the United States and Europe have said to us, we really like Canada. Canada has great clinical people. We have great researchers. So we actually want to partner with you. We want to get into the whole research area with you. And as regulators, we would love to work with you as well. That's pretty nice for Canada to sort of be in that part of the equation. It also means that we can take Canadian research here. And I spend a lot of time working with Genome Canada and other funding agencies to make sure our money is going into really good research for rare diseases. So we take Canadian research and we can bring that out internationally as well. But we need a framework. So the reason to do this, I think, is really clear. I think there's a really good reason why we need to put an orphan drug framework in Canada. It's to get the research going and to join hands internationally. Internationally, it's the way to go. So in Canada, what do we need? We need some laws that fit in under our Food and Drug Act. Our Food and Drug Act set out all the rules that you have to follow in order to bring a drug to market. So if I'm a drug company and I get a really good idea and I invent the drug, I have to go and show Health Canada, where I work, that the drug works, that it's safe, and the chemistry and manufacturing is good enough to keep marketing it. Because again, even if there's something wrong with the supply, that can make a drug very dangerous. So showing us all of that takes about 8 years of study. It's pretty tough. It's not like on the Star Trek shows where they can just sort of figure out a pandemic in the course of an episode and say, okay, let's just inoculate everybody. I mean, everybody wants it to work that way. We at Health Canada, we'd like it to be really rapid, but it takes a lot of time. The reason why is you have to start with the basic scientific idea and then go slowly. You introduce it into humans slowly. See what happens. Measure the results. Go back, go to a larger group, and again, re-explore it. Does it work? Is it safe? And you're tracking through all the hospitals. You're tracking through what we call a clinical trial and making sure for over a certain amount of time that it's doing the drug is doing what it should, and it's not doing what it shouldn't unacceptably. And then they bring all that information to Health Canada, the drug companies, the researchers, and we take a look at it. And it takes us a while to make sure that it's good enough to go on the market. But with rare diseases, there's going to be some more uncertainties. If you're looking at a drug and how it affects 500,000 people, you're going to learn a lot right away. So there's a big number that we can see the drug working in. If you got 50 people, everybody's different physiologically, and so you may get some results that you don't quite get yet. And so what we think is that you need to understand more and more about the drug, even though it's gone into the treatment context. So if people are on it, it's got a market approval, we need to keep knowing more and more about it. And we need to tell you what we do and don't know about the product. That's where I think we need to get a lot better on the regulatory side, is a more constant exchange about whether a drug's working or not. How is it really affecting you? Is it giving you bad effects you weren't expecting to have? And then working with physicians and others and drug companies to say, okay, how do we manage this? Is it still safe enough to leave it out? Do we need to develop an alternative? Do we need to change the labeling so people don't take so much or too little? And so it's more consistent regulating. It's not just at the front we make sure it's okay, but it's an ongoing thing. So the framework does that. It helps us do what we call life cycle regulating. And also it builds a framework so that we can say which drugs are orphan drugs. So we can fit into that whole international scheme. And it's really neat because it's the only place where both Europe and the States have a common application form. You can't believe, everybody has to fill out forms, right? Same with drug companies, same with researchers. And the fact that internationally you could have one form to say, am I an orphan drug, is very exciting. The really exciting part about that is if we join in that exercise, that means in Canada, we'll get the clinical studies starting to line up at the same time as everywhere else in the world. It's very frustrating, especially if you can't get access to a trial, to hear that there's been a trial going on for 5 years in the United States, and we can't get into it here. What the policy is intended to do is to start the trial points at the same time, and then as international bodies, we can all learn together about the drug. And then it comes out into the market closer to the same time as well. Because that's frustrating as well. You hear about a drug that's been available for 8 years in Europe, and nobody can explain to you why isn't it here? Why is it not in Canada? Because Canada's a great clinical place to work. We've got the provinces reimbursing. So potentially there's a lot of promise in the system, but we need the rules to come in. Now, there are some upsides and downsides to changing regulations. There's a discussion really about how much is practical as a regulatory burden. You always have to be careful of that. Because, again, you want to make sure that the science is good, that the drug is safe, but you can also over-regulate. That's something we've done before as well. You have to be very careful putting in the wording around that. And that's why the consultations are so important. That's why as we're writing the new rules, we're making sure, so I'm going to our international colleagues, I'm going to the Orphan Drug Office in the States, and I'm going over to Europe and talking through with them and saying, give us your advice. You've been doing this for a long time. Tell us the best ways to do it. I talk with the companies, I talk with the scientists, and above all, I'm talking with the patients, because if we're not getting or going to get better outcomes from this, if it's not getting more drugs to you that are good drugs, then the policy is not doing what it should. And so that's really what we're doing right now. We're writing up the proposals, and as we're writing, we're checking in with people, but then there'll be a formal consultation stage. So we have what's called a gazetting process. So there'll be proposed regulations that people can consider, think through, ask, is this really making sense? And we'll hopefully be able to clarify things with anyone who's interested. This is a very important association to us because, again, you've got a collection of conditions. It's not just one. You've got a whole bunch. And I think many, if not most of them, will be rare. So this is going to have a tangible impact on you. This is about getting therapies into your condition. This is about getting clinical trials in the country to develop the drugs. So it is something we definitely want to get right. So I've sort of walked through why I think it's important. The way we propose rules is a little difficult. When they come out, they'll be very legally sort of, the language is very dense, it's hard to read, but we'll try to actually support the materials with explanations where possible. So if the associate needs a dialogue around what things mean, then that's what we need to do. We need to get out and talk about what the proposals will do and unpack this sort of the legal terms. We can't help them being fairly legal because they are laws, so they do have to read like that. But it's what they do that's really important. So again, I think within the next couple of months, we're going to be much closer to tabling a whole proposal. The association is starting to have a fairly good picture of the main elements of the framework. But again, I would really feel entitled to voice your opinion and to really get in and consider things. I think people feel very frustrated and marginalized dealing with the federal government. In my office, we read everything we get. We really take it seriously. We pour it over. I have people phoning me, talking through issues, and that's a very important part. I think if you can bundle comments, though, through the association, it's be very helpful for us. Because if you're part of a rare disease that's got a difference from one of the others, that's, again, very important for us to pick up. So once we get the framework rolled out, we'll give it to the association, and hopefully we can have a very good discussion around it. Short of that, we're going to keep moving along. We hope within this year you'll see the formal proposals come out. And I mean, it's been too long in waiting, so the government has seen this as a really big priority to move. So we'd like to do that within the next year to year and a half and get that in place. Following that, we really need to join hands with Europe and the United States and make sure that we start to get this rolling into the country as fast as possible. So hopefully that gives you a basic idea. Are people following? Is it sort of there with you? Okay. All right, great. Well, thank you very much for your time. And again, if you're at all hesitant to comment, just please really do it. We do listen, and it affects the policy when you really tell us how things affect you. So thanks again.
So that was a excellent lecture. Thank you very much. I think we all learned a lot about that, and we really want to thank you for dedicating your time today. Before I let you go, I wanted to comment to the group. This is an important topic, and for the members that are out there today, if you could say sort of what concrete things you would like to hear from them as people who are suffering with vision loss, if you could just maybe comment a couple of the concrete things you'd like to hear back that could be filtered through the foundation, I think that would be great.
Okay, so here's a really tangible thing, and I'll just show you how comments can matter. There's a competition going on right now about the threshold for when something's an orphan drug or not. So in Europe, for example, there's a prevalence rate of under 5 in 10,000. So that defines the numbers that you have to have for the population. In the United States, it's under 200,000 people would have the disease in the population. There are people here that are arguing for a much tighter lens. So it'd be 1 in 10,000, much smaller populations. And many rare diseases are like that. About half of the rare diseases are in that what we call ultra-rare place. If we wrote in that ultra-rare and it knocked your disease out, that's a pretty big deal. So if you have, and you may not know the numbers in your disease, but some of your healthcare practitioners will, some of the specialists will, you can gather literature research, we'll go and research things if you ask us. But we want to make sure that, this is why I'm saying we need to get it right. If we go too small in that prevalence rate, it then won't achieve potentially in many of your disease states what the policy could achieve. So that's, I think, the kind of tangible thing we're looking for in the consultations. If we're designing an element where you're aware of clinical trials that are going on in Europe and you really wanted to join them, and you're uncertain whether this policy could have helped you on that, that's the kind of thing we need to look at. Because if it's not achieving that, then we need to make sure we design it so it does achieve that. And that's really, those are the kinds of really tangible things we pay attention to. Because we get it. I mean, it's, at a certain point, writing the law should be fairly simply put together. I mean, you know what the objective is, and if you're not meeting it, then you have to adjust it. And I can't speculate about where we're meeting it or not. It's really the people that are going to be impacted. So the people with the diseases and who treat the diseases that can tell us about that. So those are two examples, but there are many more when you read through the proposals that you may say, wow, if you do that, I really think it's going to harm our community. And we really need, or help. Telling us what we got right is not a bad thing either. Because other people will try to convince me, oh, don't put that in. And I can say, no, wait a minute, it's a good thing. We'll leave it there. So, again, there are many tangible examples.
So thank you again. You know, it's really, really nice to hear such a impassionate speech, and somebody who obviously cares so much about the work that he's doing, really to help our cause. So I would remind everybody out there with their contacts with the Foundation Fighting Blindness to keep that in mind. Share your ideas with the foundation so we can help things move forward.